Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Power podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life.
What's the one thing that unites Jews, right? Like, what's the one thing that we have in common? It's not that we're all the same race. It's not that we're all the same ethnicity. It's not that we're all religious and not religious. It's not necessarily even that we all believe in God, right? And not every Jew believes in God. But the one thing that we kind of have together is this Torah, right? That sort of unites us all. But it's interesting. We talk a lot about Torah, but I'll be very clear on what this Torah is. So today we're gonna do a bit of a deeper look into it. So if you look at the Tanakh, and if someone want to read the first source, please.
Okay. These are the statutes, the ordinances, and the Torahs that the Lord gave between himself and the children of Israel on Mount Sinai through Moshe.
Okay, thank you so much. Pause for a second. What stands out for us when you read through it? Okay, these are the statutes, these are the ordinances, and the Torahs. Why is it
Right.
Why is it plural?
Yeah.
Right? As far as I knew, there was just one Torah. Rashi, who is one of the commentators on the Torah, what does he say? Generally, when Rashi writes something, he's usually answering a question. The question isn't written there, but the question he's answering is why the plural of Torahs, right? So he says it teaches us that the written Torah and the oral Torah were all given at Sinai to Moses. So this is kind of like the proof from the Torah that the written Torah was given together with a counterpart called the oral Torah.
Right.
So a couple of questions. Question number one is, why did God give the Torah in two parts, right? The oral Torah and the written Torah. Why not just write everything down?
Because it'd be too much.
Okay, so let's clarify what it is. First part is the written Torah. What is the written Torah? The written Torah consists of the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings.
Torah
Altogether-
Nevi'im Ketuvim.
Yeah, Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim. And altogether it's about 24 books of the written Torah.
Right.
What is the point of the Torah? Like what does it contain within it? So I think we all picked up on it, right? It's somewhat of our history. It's not a history book though,
No.
right? Because it doesn't go chronologically, it doesn't
No.
it doesn't go bit by bit and say this is the history
It's
of the
not-
Jewish people.
right.
What's recorded is kind of like the narrative, and the only things that made it into the written Torah are things that have a lesson for us until today. Right? So for example, we have the stories of Avraham and his tests. The reason why that was recorded and other people's tests were not recorded is because there was something specific about those specific tests that we can learn lessons from until today, and that's why they're recorded. So when we talk about like it's our history, it's much more than our history, and in some ways it's less than our history, right? Because it's not like this is the history book. It's the narrative, of how the world was and how it was started, and it's done in a way that is teaching us lessons for it. And the second part of the Torah, the second thing that the Torah is, and some of us I think said it, is Torah is called Torah Chaim, right? It's the guidelines for life. It has the mitzvot in it, right? What's the goal of mitzvot?
To connect with God.
To connect with God, right? So the word mitzvah comes from the root word tzav, which in Hebrew means to connect.
Yeah.
And the idea there is that a mitzvah connects us to God. Because if you think about it, right, let's just say I decide to eat something kosher today. God has a will that Jewish people eat kosher. If I do that, I'm being a partner with God in fulfilling his will in this. And there's an interesting story that's told in the days of the Romans and Rabbi Akiva. They were very anti-circ as well in those days, anti-Brit Milah. And one of the Romans went up to Rabbi Akiva, and he thought he had a foolproof argument to explain to him why Brit Milah, why circumcision was not okay. So he says, what's better, what God creates or what human creates? Right? And I think most of us would listen to that story and kind of be like, okay, what human creates? What did Rabbi Akiva say? Great question. Come back tomorrow. Comes back the next day, and he walks in, and it's like smells divine in his house. on the table, there's this fresh loaf of bread, and there's also a stalk of wheat on it. And he says to him, which one would you rather eat? And he obviously picks the bread. So he says, see, what people make is better than what God makes. And the idea that Rabbi Akiva kind of is teaching the Roman there is that what we think that God created a perfect world. That's not true. God created an imperfect world, and he put us into this world in order to partner with him to perfect the world, right? So, for example, God created people who have needs. And he created other people that have the ability to fulfill those needs, right? So that's an imperfect world. God could have created it that everyone has all the money they need, right? But instead, God gives some people money and some people less money. And then he gives us the mitzvah of giving charity. So he created this world, and he created us, and he invites us to be co-creators with him, partner with him in co-creating this world and making it a better place through the avenue of the mitzvot, right? Like that's what all the mitzvot. So that's kind of like the written law. You've got the narrative of our history, and you've got the mitzvot. What's the oral law?
Apologetics.
There's two things, right? That the oral law is. The first one is we saw, for example, when you turn over on this side, right? The written law says Torahs, right? It says it in plural. How does Rashi know that means the written Torah and the oral Torah? How does Rashi not know? How does Rashi know, for example, that there wasn't another Torah that God gave before the Torah and took it away, right? Like, how does he know the plural refers to the oral Torah and the written Torah? Because what happened was at Sinai, Hashem gave Moses the written Torah, and asked him to write it down. He wrote the rest of it down when at the end of his life, right? Because that's what it was. At the same time, God gave Moshe the oral Torah, which explains when along with it, right? According to the Torah, it is not supposed to be written down, right? It wasn't allowed to be written down, right? Originally, we're going to talk about what changed in history, that nowadays a lot of it is written down. The written Torah is kind of like condensed, and it has and things in it that you look at. For example, you read it and you read Torah, right? It should say Torah, right? The Torah, right? But the Torah is hinting at us there's an explanation, and that explanation was given at Sinai together with the written Torah, right? Why did God do it that way? Why give the written Torah and the oral Torah together? Like, why not just, let's say, write everything down? As I said earlier, originally the oral law was not allowed to be written down.
Right.
Nowadays we have the Mishnah, which is written down. We have the Talmud, the Gemara, which is the same thing, just a different word for it, which is also written down. How did that happen to be that we have the oral Torah written down? Is because what happened is when the Jews were in exile in Babylon, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi recognized that people were in distress. They were in exile. They didn't have that peace of mind to sit and study Torah. He was worried that the transmission of the oral law would get corrupted, right? So there's a principle in Judaism which says, right, that when there is a unique moment to do something for God, then you're allowed to even turn the Torah over, so to speak. Right now, obviously, it has to be extenuating circumstances, right? You can't just say, oh, God wants me to eat this cheeseburger because it smells delicious. It has to be something like an extenuating circumstances, right? It's been used a few times in our history. So this Rabbi Hanassi, said that these are extenuating circumstances, and we need to redact the oral law, and he redacted it into the Mishnah. And that was written down. We have the 6 books of the Mishnah, and then a while later, the same thing happened, and they redacted the oral law further into the Talmud. So what is the Mishnah? What is the Talmud?
The Mishnah is a much broader outline of the oral law, where the Talmud is like refining that and filling in the details of the other one.
Right.
But there's laws in the Torah too. What's the difference between the laws in the Torah and the laws in the Mishnah? Is the laws in the Torah are very condensed, right? It says, for example, you should have a mezuzah on your door. How do we know what that is? How do we
You see
know?
the little plus sign when you're on a screen on a computer? I feel like the Torah is like the big header. And then the little plus sign like is the Mishnah. And they're like, okay, I still don't know what this is. And there's another plus sign, and then that's
the Torah pshat, but we need to know. That's why it's so misunderstood by other religions, because they only read the pshat. That's not enough.
Okay, so Peshat is I don't know if we're gonna get a chance to get to it today, but
Yeah.
if not, we'll get to it next week. Peshat is, you're right, there are different levels and layers within the Torah as well. Let's kind of try and understand like the written Torah and the oral Torah and how they fit together and why it was given like that. So the oral Torah is also kind of like the laws, but how they apply, like the details of the laws, not just the details of the laws, like the principles of the laws. For example, when electricity came up, the question was asked, actually I'm gonna use different
Yeah.
question. I'm gonna use the question of plastic surgery. About 150 years ago, plastic surgery became much more common, right? The question now is a Jew allowed to have plastic surgery, right? Now, what are they going to compare it to? There's no case in the Torah that is given with plastic surgery that, how do we know? Right? So how it's worked out is that there are principles that we learn from the laws, right? General principles. For example, and I did a whole class on plastic surgery once, it's fascinating. How do they work it out? Is that they look at, generally, the principle in Jewish law is everything is allowed unless there has a prohibition in the Torah that says it's not allowed. So just because something's new, we don't forbid it just because it's new. But is there a prohibition in the Torah that would contradict, right? So, for example, is a person allowed to do plastic surgery? So it comes up with all different things. On the one hand, there is a principle within the Torah that you're allowed to, and not just you're allowed to, but we have an imperative to heal. Right? When someone is sick, according to Jewish law, you're not supposed to just say, okay, I'll pray to God and he'll make me better. But we're supposed to go to a doctor, do what we can to make ourselves better. So on the one hand, maybe that plastic surgery should be allowed because you're healed. On the other hand, there's a prohibition in the Torah that you're not allowed to wound yourself. Right? And then it goes further and further into like, okay, what type of wounding is allowed, what type of wounding isn't allowed, are you allowed to wound yourself if it's for a positive purpose, etc. But the idea of it is how do we know whether a Jew can have plastic surgery, whether a Jew can use a phone on Shabbat, right? Like these are all new situations. How do we know? Is because the oral law contains all the principles of the laws, and from that we kind of derive it. And I think it's very, very similar in the secular court system, right? Like when a new case comes up, they look for precedent in beforehand, right? So the oral law kind of it contains the explanations of the Torah. We read the Torah and we're like, hey, what's going on, right? And all the different commentators comment on
Rashi, Rambam.
that's the explanations, and we're going to talk about that. I don't know if we'll have time today, but there's 4 levels of that as well. Why was it given in 2 parts, right? Why didn't God give, for example, right, the Mishnah? Why didn't he give it written down? It was going to get written down later. The Talmud was going to get written down later. Why didn't he give it written down at the same time as okay, ladies, I'm looking for a PCP, right? I came across this fantastic looking PCP. He looks fabulous. It says on his thing that he's read all the books about medicine, and he's even read the Dummy's Guide to PCP. He's really, really, really well read. Should I go to?
No.
Why? Because his entire education has been book learning.
Uh-huh.
Why would you never go to him?
Yeah.
Right.
Because there are certain things that are not book subjects only, right? You would never trust a brain surgeon who's read you wouldn't trust him if he wrote the Dummy's Guide to Surgery, but he never went through the training and the watching and the supervision, because there are certain things that you learn not just by reading a book, by lived experience, by learning from someone who is a master and observing them and then practicing under them and then doing it on your own. And Judaism is same. It's not a book study, right? It's not like we open it up and let's find out whether the world was created in 5 or 6 days, right? That's not right. That's not what Torah is, right? Torah is about a learning that is supposed to shape who we are. So God gave it to us in 2 parts because it was always supposed to be transmitted from teacher to student, from teacher to student, from teacher to student, and all the way down the line. And in fact, how do we know that the oral law was transmitted correctly? Is because there was a system of transmission. What was the system of transmission? Is there was Moses, who gave smicha. Smicha is like rabbinical certification to Yehoshua. And now Yehoshua, his student, was certified that he had learned enough, he had enough lived experience that he was now qualified to teach it to the next generation. And then someone who was certified from Yehoshua, who had been certified from Moshe, would certify the next person down. So that chain of transmission could be traced all the way back up to Moshe. Like, this is not just anyone can teach. The oral law can be a transmitter of the oral law. It has to be someone who has studied enough, who has enough expertise in the subject, who has also enough lived experience of authentic Torah, that he's been qualified, and now he is not only just qualified to teach it, but he's also qualified to teach, to qualify the next generation down, right?
So what you're explaining, what I think about is that you're explaining like Judaism also as a religion and a culture. Like that's how it was, I was like receiving that information because it's an experience, culture, but it's also a religious practice. I don't know.
Towards the word culture. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but for me, a culture is something that you can experience. I go to Italy and I immerse myself in the Italian culture for a couple of weeks, and it's great. And then I come home and I want to get on with life. That's not what Judaism is, right? It's not like a culture something that we experience. It's a way of life. It's a lifestyle, right? I'll give you I had an interesting conversation with my daughter today in school. She was saying that she teaches in one of the schools, and she was saying that one of the parents has come to one of the other teachers and said, look, everything with my kid is a fight, and I can't fight them on homework anymore. So we're just not doing homework. The kid's 4 or 5 or whatever it is, right? I have to fight them on like eating dinner and getting to bed and having a bath. I can't fight them on thing as well. And the teacher was like to my daughter, well, isn't that parenting? I said, I disagree. Right? I don't think that's what parenting is. Parenting isn't just fighting your kids to do X, Y, Z, right? It's about being there for your child. It's about loving them. It's about bringing out the best in them. It's about teaching them about the world, right? It's about preparing them for adulthood. So I don't know if that's what you meant by culture, but
I think I'm saying the same thing that you are, but I do see it as an experience as well.
Yes, but it's an all-encompassing experience, right? Yes, that's the thing. Like, it's not just bagels and lots and something. To me, that's like a cultural experience, right? You go to Rome and you have the gelato, the delicious gelato there, right? Like, that's a cultural experience, right? But this is something, it's all-encompassing, right? Like, it's taught not just by, a story and whatever, but it's taught by, in the Talmud, you see this all the time. Like, the students are questioning the rabbis, right? They're questioning, why are you doing it this way? Why are you doing it this way? There's a fascinating story that's told of Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva was living in the time when the Romans, they had a terrible decree against Jewish people, and they said the Jews are not allowed to study Torah in public anymore. And Rabbi Akiva went and he studied Torah, and he taught Torah in public. And his students said to him, Rabbi, why are you doing that? So before we even go into the thing of why he's doing that, right? Well, this is your teacher. He's taught you everything, and now you're publicly questioning him on his decisions, right? Think about a lot of organizations that you may or may not have worked in, like that wouldn't necessarily go down so well. Your boss says, okay, I've made this decision, and you're like, really? Why are you making that decision? So how could they ask? And the answer is that they're encouraged to ask in Judaism. Why? Because the rabbi is not just, I will teach you what Jewish law says about this. The reason why they're asking is they're saying, Rebbe, right, our rabbi, if you are risking your life to study Torah, to teach Torah in public, when the Torah doesn't demand that you teach Torah in public, there must be something so important that we need to learn from it, that we can question you, right? And you see it again and again, like these interesting, bizarre stories of students like following the rabbis and asking them all these questions. But that's what it's about. It's not just, is this chicken kosher or not, right? Is the chocolate kosher or not? It's about, how do we wake up in the morning? How do we think about other people? How do we think about ourselves? How do we even get dressed? You know, and like everything. It encompasses every single step of the way. And that's why God gave it to us in two parts, the written Torah and the oral Torah, so that it could never be a thing where you just go into the library, you pull out the books, study it on your own, and think. It had to be an interactive transmission from teacher to student, from parent to child, etc., etc. I didn't get into talking about what the Talmud is, but what is the Talmud generally is they're taking the Mishnah, and like one person will understand it this way and one person will understand it this way, and they usually contradict each other.
tell you a
And
little-
basically what we kind of just did today is the idea that the Torah was given in two parts, the written Torah and the oral Torah. They were and they were given because we have to learn them together, and we have to learn from people, and the chain of transmission was done in a way that it was certified from one generation to the next generation, until at some point it was redacted, then it was redacted again, and now, you know, we have more oral Torah that is written the whole time. But again, it's that chain of transmission from generation to generation that protects the integrity.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avot. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.